All right. Okay, it's time for the video the world has been waiting for. It is, what are the major developments in English central government in the period 1066 to 1216? This forms up like a major part of the A-level course, and if you understand what these major developments are, then yeah, the rest of it really sort of falls into place. It makes a lot more sense when you connect this with local government, obviously. And then when you're looking at the impact of the papal reform movement and the role of the archbishops in all this, you need to have this as your grounding. So this is the place to start. So what are these major developments? So the first thing I think probably I want to talk about is the Exchequer. Certainly developed by the time of Henry I, possibly earlier. But the first solid evidence we get for it is from the reign of Henry I. Basically, it's a simple accountancy system. The Exchequer comes literally from checkered. It's a checkered cloth where the sheriffs will come to render the farm their annual tax that they need to pay. And the checkered cloth is simply used almost like an abacus as a counting system. So they come and it makes it very easy to count what the sheriffs are bringing in. What I find interesting about the Exchequer particularly is what it says about this word account, and it's the connection of accountancy with accountability. The sheriffs are literally held to account. Obviously, by the period of Henry II, etc., when we're looking at into the inquest into the sheriffs and this sort of event, then this becomes really obvious how this is working. So the Exchequer is certainly an important development, and we can sort of put it at the centre of many of the developments of this time, because massively important is this ongoing need to bring in more and more money. So the Normans and later the Angevines, they need money in a much greater level than the earliest Saxon kings had, and so the Exchequer is a really important development of this, and it shows this sort of theme of centralisation, that the whole of government in England at this time is becoming centralised. It's becoming centralised around the person of the king and his familiar regis, or around his household. So while we're here, let's talk about the familiar regis. So we've got the five functions of the familiar regis. So familiar, so family, but not necessarily members of his immediate family, but people with whom he is familiar. These are the people who travel with the king. These are itinerant monarchs. They travel from place to place, particularly if we think about Henry II, most famously, is the most famous itinerant monarch. He's said to have exhausted his familiar regis by travelling around and round endlessly, circuitously, around and round the Angevine Empire. He's supposed to have had this incredible energy. So the familiar regis, the five functions, we make sure I get this right. We've got the domestic, the financial, the judicial, the administrative, and the military. These are looking after all of the needs of the king, from personal protection to his physical needs, his clothing, obviously the financial. They're literally taking huge sacks of silver pennies with them everywhere they go, collecting money and distributing patronage as and when. So this is another massively important aspect of central government at this time, again centred really on the person of the king. Of course, William Rufus, his familiar regis, is notorious for their behaviour, for their bad behaviour, and this is when Henry I in his coronation charter is promising to do away with all of these bad practices from the time of William Rufus. So we've got the Exchequer, and we have the familiar regis, the royal household. We can call that the royal household. So I mean, they'll be doing things, meting out justice. Justice is too big a topic to talk about here, but this is another massive focus of centralisation for the Norman and the Angevine kings, is this ever-increasing standardisation of justice, tied up both with control and with profit. So we can link it, of course, back with the Exchequer there. The Angevines and the Normans and the Angevines are really about just maximising their profit. There's a couple of enormous expenditures they have to deal with. There's the dowry of Matilda to Emperor Henry V. The dowry of Matilda to Henry V is enormous, and Henry I has to raise it ridiculous amount of money to pay for this. And then there's Richard's more or less financing the Third Crusade personally or from the coffers of England. And then, of course, Hubert Walter and Eleanor raising the revenue for Richard's release. So you're talking about enormous, nothing like, I mean, William the Conqueror, William Rufus spent nothing like this amount of money. It's £100,000 for Richard's release, and it's estimated, well, actually, never mind estimating, the pipe roll for 1130 for Henry I, we're looking at sort of an annual income of about £30,000. So you're looking at sort of over triple the annual income of Henry I just to have Richard released. It's vast sums. And so all of these processes of governments are developing in order to rake it in. They're just raking in the cash. So I've just mentioned Hubert Walter. Obviously, he's Archbishop of Canterbury. He's also the Chancellor, and I'm going to talk about the role of the Chancellor, and I'll talk about the role of the Chief Justiciar. So, the Chancellor, in charge of the Chancery, the keeper of the King's Great Seal. Obviously, the kings don't sign. We know this. Magna Carta isn't signed; it's sealed. So the King's Seal, the seal impression put on any document, is in the hands of the Chancellor. So the Chancellor is literally signing on behalf of the king, so enormously important in this role. So any document that comes out from the Chancery is being sealed there by the Chancellor. Chancellor responsible for handing out the writs and the charters. Yes, it's what I always talk about as the boring bits, but it's quite interesting when you get really into it. But this is like the day-to-day functioning of government. The writs, these are commands that the king is passing out, or his prominent nobles are passing out across the kingdom, across the empire. And the charters, of course, these are grants of rights or particular privileges that are being passed out, possibly in return for homage, or in return for an oath of loyalty from subjects, from vassals across the empire. So again, this is massively significant. Under Henry II, we get what are called returnable writs, and these are the standardised writs that are sent out. And this is connected with justice. And I will talk about that more in more detail on another video just about justice. But important to understand about the returnable writs and the assizes. This is all coming from the Chancery, embodied by the role of the Chancellor. And Hubert Walter is, for people who I've spoken to about this, I know you'll know how I feel about this. So the course is English Government and the Church, 1066 to 1216. For me, Hubert Walter is the individual that absolutely epitomises this. This combining of the lay and the ecclesiastical in the body of this one man, and he is this incredible administrator, and really sort of the forerunner of so many sort of great politicians of the later Middle Ages and indeed later periods. So Hubert Walter, a fascinating character. Do go in and do look at him in as much detail as you can. If you understand Hubert Walter, you understand this period and you understand this topic. So along with the Chancellor, the other really great office of state is Chief Justiciar. Seems to have its prototype really under the infamous Ranulph Flambard, who's William Rufus's top guy. He's pretty much carrying out the job of Chief Justiciar, although it's never named. And then we have Roger of Salisbury under Henry I. This is where it sort of becomes more solidified that this is exactly the role of this position, the role of this job. It's important to sort of see the difference between the Chief Justiciar and a regent, because the regent is acting on the king's behalf. So prior to Flambard and Salisbury, we've got Bishop Odo, we've got Lanfranc as well, acting as regent for the king, and what they're doing is speaking with the king's name. The difference with Chief Justiciar is these are now independent. These are independent officials. Of course, they're working for the king, but things that's coming out in their name. They are passing these laws. They are responsible for these laws or acts or collection of taxes, whatever it is. And this is why Flambard gets such a hard time, really, because he gets the blame for everything that William Rufus is blamed for. It's sort of Flambard comes out, oh, it was the bad practice. I think the chronicles talk about the evil advisors, and it's clearly Flambard that they're talking about. So what we've got here in the role of Chancellor and Chief Justice here is you've got this burgeoning civil servants. These are politicians. And we haven't seen anything quite like this before the conquest. There's the Witan, of course, and there's the great earls. Godwin, Edwin and Morcar, these sort of spring to mind. But it's different. There's a far sort of greater level of complexity, of sophistication. And this is what we're looking at across the period, is this increasing level of sophistication. So we've talked about the Exchequer and justice and the collection of finances and the royal household and the chancery and the role of Chief Justice here. Underpinning all of this, of course, is the introduction of feudalism. They don't call it feudalism at the time, as you know. And I've done another video where I speak about feudalism in more depth, but this is about this sort of looking at the looking at the country as a whole, and everything being connected again to the body of the king. This increasing degree of centralisation.